Hi again, everybody. This is Pastor Laila with episode 10 of Meeting You There. And today we're talking about the value of story. The statement reads this way: we value your story. Everyone comes to the table bringing their unique story, all their history, hurts, and hopes. Your story is part of God's story. God welcomes you to the table, and we do too. And this value I just want to sit and bask in this value. I just love it. And I am so incredibly grateful to have John Holt with us today. John is the Director of Student Ministries here at Shepherd of the Lake. So he works with the high school kids, and I shouldn't say kids, students. I think it shows my age that I say kids. These are like young adults. These are like legit young adults. And I just happen to be middle-aged. So anybody under 40 to me now is a kid. Oh, you're 44, I'm 45, you're a kid. But he works with high school students and also eighth graders and their families, and really is just sort of a jack of all trades around the office as well, and a really great conversation partner in the hallways when we were together in the office. And man, I would just pop into his office for a 5-minute conversation and leave an hour later going, okay, John, I'm sorry, I just hogged your time. But I just absolutely love being able to talk with you, John, and I'm so grateful that you are here with us today for this to talk about the value of story. So welcome, John.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So this is the sort of the culmination of the value statement, that we value your story. And when I asked you to be part of this series, I said, okay, which one do you want to do? So I'm wondering what it is about this value, the value of story, that made you say, yeah, I want to have a conversation about that. Or was it just like the last one left? And you're like, oh, I guess I'll talk about story, whatever. Or was it like, yeah, I want to talk about story because this matters. This is important.
Yeah, I think it really matters. And I have learned a lot. So a wise friend of mine once taught me this kind of viewpoint that there's your world, there's my world, and then there's the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so we all have our own individual stories, and then there's kind of the world where those stories converge. And I think for me, this idea of a single story, right? The danger of a single story is kind of something in the midst of all that's going on in the world that we look at people and we think, I can tell you in 10 minutes of knowing that person, I can tell you what their story is, who they are, how they function. But when you get into the real deeper places, the deeper story where people are at, what they've lived, their oppressions, their joys, their struggles, all that, you find that you have tons more in common, but you also really get a sense of who somebody is based on their story and their journey. And that for me has been a lifelong appreciation of. And I think it's important that we value everybody's story because everybody's story is different. So, I love this conversation. I love this value. And I don't think we take enough time as humans digging in.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that there's your world, my world, and the world. And that we, take these little snippets of what we can see about people, or maybe a tiny little thing that we read about somebody, pardon me, and then they assume that we know all the things about them, right? It just makes me think of that old game show, again, dating myself, right? Name that tune. It's like, I can name that tune in 4 notes. I can name that tune in 3 notes. And so we hear 2 notes of the symphony of somebody's life, and we think, oh, I know that one, right? And then we can be more dismissive of it, or feel like we're an expert on somebody else's story and we should be able to know what's best for them, or those kinds of things, without listening to their full story. So I really appreciate that insight, John. Thank you.
Yeah. But I also think there's a richness to when you dig into people's stories. There's something that, there are people that I've thought, hey, this is who they are, and based on, a limited amount of interaction. But then all of a sudden, once we start to have further conversations, dig deep, drill down a little bit, I find myself, wow, I missed so much of who this person is, because maybe for a certain amount of time, I didn't take the time to find out more and ask those questions and be vulnerable myself. And then I find myself, feeling a little bit bummed out myself that I didn't take that time, that I didn't do that work, even though at that point, yeah, this is great. We have a better understanding of each other. I think that's important too. For me, I don't want to regret, like, I didn't really know this person as a person, as a full human being. This is their journey. I really want to know that. I want to know that person, but I also want to know more about what makes them tick. And that's something that's important to me. I really want to know what makes them tick, what makes you, you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like when we share our stories or when we hold space for others to share their stories, I know I learn about myself even, and I'm able to integrate these parts of my story that feel really disjointed. They seem almost more integrated when I'm able to share them with another person, when somebody holds space for that story.
Yep.
So that's really a gift that you give to people when you hold space for their story. Yeah. And I know that there's sometimes a misconception, or I don't know what the right word would be, but just the sense that, coming to the communion table or coming into church or something, there's parts of us that we need to leave at the door, or parts of our story that we need to leave outside that don't belong in church, right? What I love about this value is that it's like, no,
Right.
like, no, your whole, like every second of it is God's holding you in all of that.
Yep.
Right. And all of that is forgiven, and all of that is fed, and all of you is empowered to become more integrated, more whole, and to see yourself as a child of God in the story of God's unfolding story of creation.
Yep.
I get very excited. Yeah. And it's not easy to preach that stuff, but it's easy, maybe easier to extend that grace to other people than it is to really feel that in my own bones. I think it's easier for me to say, like, yeah, that's true for you, but there's these little pieces of my story, or these little things that I've thunk or whatever that aren't going to be embraced, right? So I get it. I get that it's really hard to rest in just the enormity of and the radicalness of God's grace and love.
Right.
For all the bits,
I think people walk in and they're like, if people only knew, right? My brokenness, my scars, my struggles. And I'm like, no. And you don't have to share them, right? Like that's up to you to share, who you are and what your struggles, repressions, or whatever. But know that, bring that in, because all of that, God made us all perfect child of God. And that's a part of your story and your journey. And it's okay. And it's good. I wish more people felt that way. Sometimes I wish I was strong enough to always feel that way, because, I'm no different, right?
Yeah.
So I'm with you 100%. When you walk in the door, be your whole self. And that's with all the good stuff and all the struggle stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So we unfortunately are not able to walk in the door right now. Which, I did, because I'm, in my office, because I'm at home right now. All you would hear would be other noises in my house, in my neighborhood. So, but we're not able to walk in the door right now. And so how does this value of story inform your life as you move about through this time of pandemic and social upheaval and political division and all of the things that just feel like they pile? How is this informing you in this time, this value of story?
I think it's important for us, first of all, to continue to find ways to be connective, to hear, witness, be a part of people's evolving stories. Because there's this idea that I think, because we're socially distanced or isolated for the most part, that our stories aren't evolving, right? So just this morning, one of my good friends from Kansas City, she and her husband, who moved to Des Moines about a year ago, this morning I get a text and she had a baby. They had a baby, and like, I was mindful of it, mindful of their journey, and knowing that she was due soon, but I didn't know today was going to be the day necessarily, right? And so seeing that and being a part of that story today and being able to text back and forth with her and her husband, this celebration, this joy, was really life-giving, right? So excited for them. And so I think to stay engaged in relationship so that we can continue to let our stories unfold together, even though we're not in person, which is kind of for me, I love in person more than anything, right? That's my fave, is when you're just sitting there with somebody, hanging out, having a cup of coffee, having a beer, whatever, and just talking about life. That's the good stuff. But in place of that, it takes a little more work. And so I think it's important in your personal life. And then, in the church life, there's, people in our community that are having different struggles, maybe with disease or something else, cancer, this or that. And I'm just reminded as I stay in contact with them, how are things going, and checking in, and hey, what, where are you at? What do you need? I just think those things are really important in terms of continuing to be present in people's stories and continuing to invite people to be present in our stories. Because that's the other side of it, is this isolation stuff. We tend to kind of, go back into our shell and not necessarily open that door or invite people in on a more regular basis, right? We're not bumping into each other at the office. I'm not having friends over. They're not having us over. So I just think it's important. You gotta put some work in to make that happen and to stay involved and a part of people's journeys and stories. So.
Okay, there was just a little bit of silence because I just had my mind blown a little bit, because I know you're looking at me like, why? Because I just realized what's responsible for part of the dull ache in my spirit, and that is that I really miss stories. I really miss just the chance encounters. Mm-hmm. And I'm realizing that I've been very, very spoiled to be, like you said, bumping into people and, and being able to just chat with them, and particularly during worship, after worship. I don't talk during worship. No side conversation. Right. But just being able to these chance encounters where we can share snippets of stories, right? And now I feel more empowered. Thank you. I feel more empowered to make the effort to, I'm not powerless. I can reach out and say, how are you and what's your story today?
Even if it's like not silly stuff, but I love sports. I've always loved sports. I played sports, and those side conversations in the office where Lewis Hansen, who's a huge Bears fan and Chicago fan.
We still love him though.
We do. Well, he's all right. He's all right. No, I mean, it's so he and I would just talk junk about, football. When I come to the office after a Sunday, on a Monday morning or whatever, talking sports, talking about what's going on, even silly little conversations about something as, trivial as a sporting team. Those conversations, on a certain level are kind of holy, right? Like we're in connection. We're talking about something that, connects us, right? So I'm with you. I miss that a ton.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you said those connections are kind of holy, because it's all over in scripture, all over in our theology, that whenever we meet another, we're encountering the holy, right? Because we are all children of God, and our stories are part of God's story.
Amen.
So, yeah. I'm now thinking of this lovely encounter that I had with someone this morning at the drive-thru at Starbucks was also holy, right? Mm-hmm. Just anytime we connect.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I just want to talk forever. I have 18 more questions, and I think we're bumping up against time.
All good.
Yeah. But I wonder, John, is there a story that you hold that you want people to know or remember from your life?
Yeah. As I think about that, how I would kind of translate it, that question would be, it's not necessarily a single story, but it's a single strand that has been there since I, even was younger. For me, it's about, I have always felt a call to walking with students, especially kids in crisis and families in crisis, right? So I'm not sure if we've talked about this, but I was a social worker. That's my degree. Mm-hmm. So before I ever did ministry, I was a social worker, and I worked with kids in crisis, especially kids who were coming out of pretty horrific situations of abuse. And for me, even prior to that, as a camp counselor, working with students, not every kid in the cabin is in a good spot. And so just
Mhm.
remembering opportunities to be a mentor relationship and to be able to walk with kids, not just in the fun, right? Not just in this is a great game of kickball, or this is a really awesome camp game, or whatever it is, but really it's the other stuff. That's the good stuff for me. Those are the stories of struggle, the stories of families falling apart, or kids struggling with parents with addiction, or whatever it is that's going on in kids' lives. Being able to be a part of those stories with kids, or those struggles with kids and families, it's been a privilege, and it's something I feel I've got a gift to be in those situations and help kids at least begin to think through or walk through them. And so for me, there have been these moments where there have been really, really impactful stories. One was a kid at camp who was really struggling and wanted to be disconnected from the rest of the cabin. And slowly throughout the week, without no pushing, he began to be a part of our devotional group, even though he didn't want anything to do with it in the conversation, just because he felt drawn into relationship, right? And that was really impactful, because I had to hold steady and let this 7th grader have the space to figure it out for himself, but also be there to support him. When I was doing social work, a kid who'd been through horrific abuse and pulled away from his home and his parents and everything that was probably as normal as it could be, who was being very violent, and I had to do a basket hold so that he wouldn't hurt himself or others. That turned into a kid, basically sitting right next to me, crying his eyes out because his world had come to an end. And being able to be on that journey and be a mentor and a person who could walk with him to a mission trip, a high school mission trip, where a kid who was really struggling with family stuff, who was talking about being self-injurious, and having a breakthrough with him, with myself and another leader in the midst of the chaos of 100 plus kids on a mission trip. We're trying to walk with this kid separately from the group to help him understand what he needs to be safe and what he needs after the trip. And I could keep going. Like, I've, again, been privileged to be a part of these moments where kids, students, families have things have bubbled up, struggles have bubbled up, and I have had the opportunity to walk with and help figure out not only what do they need right now, but what do you need down the line, and help even families to figure out resources and whatnot. And for me, I don't know that I want people to remember me because of because nobody knows those stories, right? Nobody, because they're confidential and they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I feel proudest of, right? Like, outside of my personal family and all those joys and celebrations and the things in my own family, those are the things that, for me, the stories that have continued to be deep in my heart. Because, and I still track, some of those kids I still have some connection with, or can, at least Facebook or whatever, Instagram, can track a little bit where they're at and what they're doing. That, to me, that's been most impactful in my life and most important in my life. Yeah.
Thank you for both literally and figuratively holding people in their story, in their most difficult moments, and in their moments of joy. As they think back on their story, they'll remember you as part of their story, and that you ushered them into a way of understanding their story as part of God's story.
Amen.
I want to thank you for that. Just thanks for being John Holt in the world, dude. Really appreciate your ministry here. I really appreciate having you here for this conversation. And I wish you and your family all the best in this COVID tide as your story unfolds together.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to just check in on this. And thanks for what you're doing in bringing out these stories and bringing out this opportunity giving this opportunity for folks to kind of share from the heart. I think it's powerful, and it's awesome, and it's needed right now. So thank you, Laila.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.